Good afternoon, everybody. On Wednesday, I received the report from the review team at Gibson Dunn on Wednesday, and on Wednesday and Thursday, I reviewed the report, both its findings and its recommendations. It's an exhaustive report that follows the mandate that I set out when we commissioned the review. One thing was clear from the beginning. I told them to find the truth, no matter where it led, and to turn over every rock that they were able to get to in order to get to the bottom of what happened and to let me know what the truth was. They conducted over 70 interviews, reviewed over 250,000 documents, and had access to both the personal and business devices, emails, and texts of my current and former senior staffers, of the Lieutenant Governor, and of me. And consistent with the call that I made in January, we made the report public as soon as we received it. I want to thank Randy Mastro and his team of former federal prosecutors and other members of Gibson Dunn for the extraordinary amount of work that they did in a relatively short period of time. As for the recommendations, I'm fully embracing the reforms as it pertains to my office. It has been my resolve from the beginning to learn from this and to do whatever we can to be better a better governor, to be a better staff, and to be a better administration. We owe that to the people of New Jersey, and that's what I will attempt to deliver. There will be further announcements in the coming weeks as we work to effectively implement these recommendations and their structure and to find the best possible people to fill these roles. As to the Port Authority, I agree with the main thrust of the report and the need for fundamental structural change at the Port Authority. I'm particularly intrigued by the idea of dismantling the Port Authority operations from under one roof to two. I think the report is replete with examples of the New York-New Jersey rivalries which have allowed this place not to work as one, but to ineffectively work as two. I intend to work with Governor Cuomo to further explore these recommendations and other ideas to bring a new day to the Port Authority. Lastly, I received a call from David Sampson, who informed me that after reviewing the master report, that he completely supports the recommendations laid out for the Port Authority, and that he believes that the best way to start a new era at the Port Authority is with new leadership. In line with that belief, David tendered his resignation to me this afternoon, effective immediately. I want to thank him for his service and his friendship. I look forward to discussing with Governor Cuomo, ushering in a new era at the Port Authority in light of the recent events, past history, and the recommendations laid out in the Mastro report. Questions? Nora, or Kelly, sorry. Wrong O'Donnell.
Governor, you talked about how this will not impact your decisions about your future. We've seen these events have affected how voters, even Republican voters, view you. How is it possible that this controversy will not impact a choice to run for president, or how you might even do?
Well, I mean, those are two different questions, right? Impact running as a choice, I'm just telling you that it won't. And the fact of the matter is that I had nothing to do with this, and as I said from the beginning, and this report has supported exactly what I said. And in the long sweep of things, any voters, if they consider this issue at all, in considering my candidacy, if there ever is one, I got a feeling it'll be a very small element of it, if any element at all. But in terms of my decision-making, it's simply not the way I would make a decision. The way I'll make a decision about whether to seek any future office would be, do I think it's what's best for me and my family? And secondly, do I believe that I have something unique and particular to offer that particular office at that particular time? If the answer to those two questions is yes, then I'll seek that office. And if the answer to either of those questions is no, I won't. And there won't be anything else that will enter into it, because anybody who tries to game out the politics of this kind of stuff years in advance, the last 11 weeks should probably show them that that's a fool's errand. So,
do you acknowledge that your standing has fallen?
yeah, sure. I mean, you know, but there's nothing that's permanent about that. The same way there was nothing permanent about my standing being extraordinarily high. There's nothing permanent about this stuff. And anybody who thinks that, I said that all along when my polls were good. You weren't here, but I said that all along to folks when my polls were really high. I said, get ready, they'll come down. When you make decisions, you do things, events occur, they impact you. So, you know, it's of no moment to me, though, Kelly, in the end. You know, if I were running for re-election tomorrow, maybe it would be of moment to me. I already run for re-election and got 61% of the vote. If I was running for something else sometime in the future, you know what poll I'll care about? You know, the ones that are in the few days before the election, not the ones now. They don't mean anything. And in the end, I got to tell you, they're not what I'm most concerned about as I stand here today. I'm the governor of New Jersey, and I have a job to do. And I'm going to do my job the best way I can. And as I've said dozens of times, if I do my job the best way I can, my future will take care of itself. Brian?
Regarding some of the meat of the report, it was pointed out that you were made aware of the executive director's email in which he said laws, both state and local, were broken, that there was a threat to public safety, and you were made aware of this in early October. You admitted to that. Your staff, some of your staff was also made aware at that point. I won't name names, but several of them, most of whom are former federal prosecutors working for you. How is it that this went on for roughly 8 weeks or so, where all of these former federal prosecutors were accepting really what was the word of a couple of snake oil salesmen about a traffic study when...
It's colorful, Brian.
Well,
colorful.
Yeah,
Well, why don't you just get to the question and cut the commentary back a little?
How do prosecutors not understand that if a executive director, your top person at the board,
Not my top person.
the top official,
Can you get to it already? I'll answer.
how did they do
Hey,
that?
listen, they didn't, first off. The first time this came into my consciousness was the Wall Street Journal story of October 1 or 2, somewhere in that neighborhood, when Executive Director Foy leaked his memo to the newspapers that he had written weeks earlier. And I said to 2 former federal prosecutors, my chief of staff and my chief counsel, find out for me what's going on here. Now, the way you do that is, in a normal circumstance where you look like you're dealing with an operational issue at the Port Authority, is to go to our people at the Port Authority and ask them what's going on. They came back and said, this is a legitimate traffic study. We blew the notifications to the executive director. That's our fault, but it was a legitimate traffic study, and he's just upset because he didn't know about it. I got to tell you, contextually, that made perfect sense to me because there was, as you can see from the report, a history of conflict between these folks at the Port Authority. I heard about conflict between Chris Ward, the former executive director, and our folks, Pat Foy, the current executive director, and our folks on a regular basis. It's why I believe, as I said off the top, that the best way perhaps to deal with this, at least something to consider, is, you know, taking the Hatfields and the McCoys and moving them to separate homes. Because they haven't been able to get along with each other, despite my best efforts, the best efforts of Governor Cuomo, and many of our predecessors. So nobody dropped the ball here, Brian. You're looking at this, both through your editorializing in the question and everything else, from the perspective of what you know today. Well, if I knew then what I knew today, I would have done a lot of things differently, but we didn't. So we went, we asked the questions, we got what we believe to be satisfactory answers back from the folks that we put at the Port Authority, and we believed it was an operational issue at the Port Authority that they needed to deal with. And we told them to deal with it. And that's where it ended. So part of the problem with all this is that all of us, you, me, and everybody, is now looking through the retrospectroscope. You're always smarter, and you always know more when you have that. We didn't have that then. And so I think it's an unfair characterization to say that our folks didn't do anything for 8 weeks. In fact, the report lays out that they went and pursued a number of avenues from that time all the way through to my December 13th press conference to challenge people and question people about what went on here and what each individual's role was. And so it wasn't effective because people didn't tell us the truth. But you can't, it's not fair in my view to say that people didn't do their job and try to get to answers.
some of your closest aides thought this kind of behavior was appropriate. And I'm wondering, what have you learned from this experience? What have you changed about how you govern now?
Well, first of all, you know, I would say that one of my closest aides participated in this. And for that, she was fired. And that's the first thing I did to set a different tone here, was that people need to understand that if you participate in this kind of conduct, you will not be permitted to hold the public trust and the authority that goes along with a senior position in this government. Secondly, as I've said before, you know, I've done a lot of soul searching on this over the last 10 or 11 weeks. And, you know, for me, it's going to be about making even clearer to people what is acceptable conduct and what isn't. But I will say also, as I said yesterday, I think that anybody who works for me who believed that something like this was going to be something that would be pleasing or acceptable to me didn't know me in the first place. And from that perspective, I'm not only disappointed in them, but it's obvious to me that I have to make even clearer as we move forward in the future, and I have already, about what's acceptable conduct and what is not. That's a constant challenge when you're running a large organization, and it's one that I did not do as well as I needed to do, obviously, with this happening, and one that I can intend to focus on even more as we move forward.
But have you changed any procedures?
Governor, yesterday Mr. Mastro informed us that Attorney General Sampson declined to participate in the internal investigation by your outside counsel. And so it's kind of just a two-part question. One, did that concern you? Two, did Attorney General Sampson, I know you guys are close, did he ever talk with you throughout this process to try to offer you an explanation, since it was the agency that he led that was having this trouble? And when is this resignation coming?
As I said in the statements, effective immediately. He called me this afternoon. On the first part of your question, I spoke to General Sampson on January 8th and asked him what he knew about this, if he had any involvement in it, if he authorized it, or had any idea of the planning of it or any of the rest. He said absolutely not. And that rang true to me at the time, not only because of David's reputation for honesty over the course of his entire career, but also because the role of the chairman of the Port Authority is not an operational role. His role is a policy role. And so I wouldn't expect that David would be involved in any kind of day-to-day operational issue, like a traffic study at the Port Authority. In terms of his and his firm's lack of participation in interviews conducted by the Mastro Group, he explained to me that there were issues of attorney-client privilege that he feared would be compromised if he participated in an interview. I didn't push it any further because it wasn't my role to push it any further, but that was the explanation he gave me at the time, and I have no reason not to believe that. Again, I think that his role was not central in any of these things, nor has it ever really been alleged that his role was central in any of these things. But those are decisions that he had to make based upon his ethical obligations to his clients. And thus, this decision he made, whether I agree with it or not, you know, is a different matter. But in the end, he has, as every lawyer has, their own individual obligations to their clients and what they think they can and cannot say publicly because of that. Elise.
I have a statement from David Sampson. He says, over the past months, I have shared with the governor my desire to conclude my service to the Port Authority. When he was having apparently conversations with me saying he wanted to conclude his service, did you ask him to stay on?
Yes.
And was his answer to that, I'll wait until this report is over?
No, his answer to that was, I'll stay on as long as I think I'm able.
If he wanted to leave, though,
And this preceded, by the way, his discussion with me about leaving the Port Authority goes back a year.
did he cite any reasons why he would be interested in leaving?
Yeah, he's 74 years old and he was tired. That's what he told me. And I said, well, I'm in the middle of a re-election campaign and I'm going to be going through a transition if I'm re-elected. And why don't we deal with these things at that time and not while I'm in the middle of all of this? I'd prefer you to stay. And in deference to me, he did. But David has been talking to me for the better part of a year about wanting to move on. because he just was tired. He had served a long time. He's 74 years old, and he said, you know, Chris, I'd like to spend some more time doing other things. And I asked him, as governor, to please stay and give me the time in what I hoped was going to be a transition to a second term to be able to make those decisions during that period of time. And in deference to me and to our long-term relationship, he was willing to stay on. John?
Yes, Governor. A couple weeks ago, there were a few reports about the 2011 toll hikes at the Port Authority, and those reports portrayed your role in that rollout a little differently than it was portrayed at the time. Do you want to respond to those stories and also explain again what your role, if any, was in those toll hikes?
Yeah, not really. My view is that those are the type of operational things that the Port Authority works on all the time. Governor Cuomo and I eventually came to an agreement on what we thought an appropriate toll hike would be, and it's been implemented. Yeah, Heather. Just speak up a little, Heather, I'm sorry. Sure. Sure, a few things. One, when an administration needs to respond appropriately and at my direction swiftly to inquiries from both a legislative committee and from a prosecuting office, you need to bring a law firm in to do that. We don't have the capacity in-house to be able to do that, nor would people think it would be appropriate for us to do that. So there was never any question in my mind that we were going to have to bring in a law firm from the outside to be able to shepherd all of the responses that were needed to the subpoenas served both by the legislative committee and by the United States Attorney's Office. And we wanted to do that as quickly and cooperatively as we could. And so we wanted to have a significant law firm with the type of resources available to them to be able to do this kind of job as quickly as possible. It also made perfect sense to me and is best practices in the Department of Justice that when you have a problem like this, you conduct an internal review to find out what happened and to make recommendations to try to prevent this kind of conduct in the future. Having the same group do all that made absolute sense to me from both an efficiency perspective and an effectiveness perspective. No matter who I chose to do this, questions would be raised by some quarters as to those people's objectivity. My answer to that is, look at the report. We gave them unfettered, complete access to everyone in this government and allowed them to interview people multiple times if they so desired, on multiple occasions, in order to try to get to the bottom of things. Gave them complete access not only to people's professional emails, but to their personal emails and their personal devices to be able to review text messages as well. The objectivity in this report is based on two things. One, the breadth of it and the access that they had without restriction to any information they wanted. And secondly, the reputation of the 6 people who are running this thing. These are 6 former federal prosecutors who I can guarantee you have worked hard to develop the reputations that they've earned over the course of their career and would not give away those reputations to do some type of slipshod job for me. Lastly, as to relationships with the firm, after 7 years, Heather, as U.S. Attorney in this state and nearly 5 years as governor, there's probably not a major law firm in this country, if not, and certainly not in this region, that I don't have some relationship with over that time and some personal connection to. So in the end, what I decided to do was pick the people I thought were best to do the job. I did, and I think the report will stand the test of time, but it will be tested by the other investigations that are ongoing. And it is limited, as Randy Mastro pointed out, in small part by some of the access that they had and didn't have to certain people. But in the end, all that's fronted in the report. It doesn't claim to be anything but what it is. But it is exhaustive, and it is thorough, and I don't have any second thoughts about who we selected or the process. No matter what, you're going to be criticized in this instance, and when you are, you just have to answer it and answer it directly, and that's what we've done through the report. Matt.
Governor, the stated reason for severing ties with Christie was his use of language and acting appropriately. Given that there's other salty language that's come out in some of these new documents from other members of staff, do you still
Well, let's be clear. It wasn't assaulting language because, as you know, Matt, I've been known to use a word or two of those at myself, and as have a number of you as well. So it's not that. What it is that the content of those emails showed me a lack of judgment that caused me to lose my confidence in Bill's judgment. And so that's the basis upon which I made the decision, and a decision that I stand by today, because it was made purely on that basis and not on the basis of anything else. So, no, I don't have any change of heart on that at the moment. And, you know, as far as the future goes, Matt, I'm not, as you know, I'm getting it into hypothetical questions about the future. It just doesn't make any sense for me to do so. Kevin?
The master group report clearly fixes the blame for the lane closures on Kelly and Wild. We still don't know the motive behind it. We don't know why they're closed. Is that an answer you still want? Is it an answer you ever expect? You can't. How quickly do you want it?
Well, I would have liked it on January 8th if I could have had it. But, you know, as I've said many times before, I would have hoped that everybody would speak to this group. But I also have a healthy respect for people's constitutional rights. And so I am, again, not going to be critical of people for exercising, with the advice of their lawyers, their constitutional rights. But in the end, Kevin, I don't know if we'll ever know what the motive is. As I said when I was here on January 9th, it mystifies me on every level why this was done. And I hope someday to have an answer to why it was done. But I certainly don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you if or when I'll ever know. But do I hope to? After all this, you bet I hope to. You bet I hope to. Charlie?
Since this issue has unfolded, there's been considerable attention to David Sampson's overlapping business interests with the Port Authority. Did you raise that issue with him before he tendered his resignation? Did he raise that with you? And what is your view about these continuing scores and examinations that have revealed close ties to this firm and Port Authority action?
Charlie, you know, I think if you look at many of the commissioners, both currently on the Port Authority and over history, there has always been those type of connections and potential conflicts. This is what happens when you ask people to come from the private sector and serve in a non-compensated, part-time position in a role at the Port Authority. The way to deal with that is appropriate recusals when the Port Authority has business that might cause a conflict with a business interest or representation you might have. My understanding over the course of time is that not only General Sampson, but other members of the commission on both sides of the river would engage in appropriate recusals when necessary. And so I hope that that's what General Sampson did, trust that's what he did in most, if not all of those instances. And so that's an issue for him to deal with directly. I'm sure that he will. I have every faith and trust and confidence in David's integrity, as do people on both sides of the aisle in this state over the course of the last 40 years that he's been involved on and off in public life. So I have complete confidence that he acquitted himself in a way that was appropriate and ethical. If it turns out that there were some instances that weren't handled in that way, then that's something that, you know, we'll all deal with. But I don't think, Charlie, to get to the core of your question, I think the core of your question is that you can expect that when you ask people from the private sector to come in and do these jobs in a part-time, non-compensated way, that you can ask them to give up their private sector life, which they use to support themselves and their families. And so the way to deal with that is to try to have an effective, robust conflict system where folks recuse when appropriate. And I trust that that is being attended to at the Port Authority, and if it's not, it should be attended to with even greater care. You have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yeah, is that, what a lot of this examination has shown, though, is that his firm profited substantially by his relationship at that Port Authority.
Well, that's your assumption, Charlie. I don't believe that's in the facts. That's your assumption. It's your assumption, as you often do. And that's fine. That's your right. You're a columnist. You get to assume certain things and suppose certain things, but you need to base them on facts. And I haven't seen that those facts draw a direct line between those two things. David? David?
Governor,
dedicated to Fort Lee residents only?
Well, first off, the report seems to indicate that there was a traffic study of some kind. And whether the motive for the traffic study was a traffic study now seems to have been disputed and put into real question, if not completely blown away by the report that there seems to have been on the part of Mr. Wildstein and Ms. Kelly, some type of nefarious or inappropriate motivation for it. As to the Fort Lee lanes being dedicated to Fort Lee residents, I don't think I ever said they were just dedicated to Fort Lee residents. I think what I said was they were dedicated to Fort Lee. I understand that there are people who get off the highway and drive through the neighborhoods to get the easier route onto the George Washington Bridge. Maybe even once or twice I may have done that in previous life, okay? So I understand that. I never said, and if I did, I misspoke, David, that they were dedicated to Fort Lee residents. They're dedicated, and they are dedicated to the town of Fort Lee. My understanding for their development was to relieve traffic congestion going to the bridge. And so that was my understanding at the time as to why they were, but I will tell you that that's an understanding that I've only come into knowledge of in the last number of months. Because even when I went that way a couple of times, years ago, I didn't know they were committed to Fort Lee and to the town of Fort Lee or any of that history. So, I know that. That was a two-part question. You're not really going to follow up on a two-part, are you? There's other people. No, there's other. What was the first part? I did answer that. I said it appears that there was a traffic study that may have had behind it an ill or inappropriate motive.
Well, you attributed that to the report. You didn't say, I asked if you believe it.
I believe what the report told me. Terry?
Getting back to David's answer, do you think his stepping down was essential to accomplish what you laid out that was in the report? Do you think that?
No.
In other words,
No, I don't think it was essential, but he did. And so he called me this afternoon and told me that if you're going to have a chance to institute these type of reforms, I think you have to have somebody in there who will be able to take a brand new look at this and not have to worry about the things of the past. And so I'm going to go. Now, like I said in response to the earlier question over here, this comes as no great shock to me, Terry, because David started talking to me a year ago about wanting to leave. And the only reason he stayed is because I asked him to. So it didn't come as a shock to me this morning that he called and said it. I didn't expect the call this morning, but his action is not a shock to me. I didn't think it was essential because if I did, I would have asked him to resign myself. He believed it was essential. I don't disagree with him, and so I accepted his resignation this afternoon. Yeah, Walt?
Earlier you talked about some of the unfair access that the internal council would get. Some members of the legislative committee said that they would like to be given that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Is that something that?
I'm sure. Listen, as I've said all along, we will respond and cooperate appropriately with all appropriate investigations and requests, which we have done. And we have sent, as far as I've been told, over 50,000 pages of documents to the legislature in response to their subpoenas. So let them work their way through that, and then we can see if there's anything else they might need. Yes, in the back, Christine.
Governor, following up on Brian Thompson's question, putting aside the memo Patrick Boyd sent out, on December 9th, he testified that state and federal laws could be invoked. Yet, several days later, you joked about this.
No, I joked. Oh, Christine, stop. You have to get the facts right if you're going to ask me a question. I made the joke on December 2nd, not after, excuse me, not after Pat Foy's testimony. What's your question?
You were aware of what was going on, yet you joked about it and never took it seriously.
Again, Christine, I'm not going to answer a question whose premise is absolutely, well, I understand that it's nice that you eventually got to the question, but the premise of the question is so infirmed that I'm not answering it.
What do you think of the depiction of Brady Kelly in the report? There have been some remarks that not only did it describe her actions, but it described personal details about her life and in very unflattering terms. And I wanted to know, since this was a person who was very close to you at one time, do you think the report was fair to her?
think the report laid out the facts as the investigators found them, and however anybody wants to interpret those is up to your particular interpretation. Yes, ma'am.
Veronica Pierce with Chase, New Jersey. You said that this was the most difficult experience of your professional life. As you can see, it's not over yet. Do you have an estimation of when you feel you can look at this and it will be behind you? And my second question is, how has all of this impacted your confidence, being such a confident man?
Well, I have no estimate on when this will be behind me because I don't get to decide in exclusively when it's behind me. I can tell you that I think as you've seen over the course of the last, 6 or 7 weeks, I'm back to work. I'm out there, I'm meeting with the public, I'm doing my job, I'm working with the legislature on important pieces of legislation that they're dealing with, just as late as yesterday doing that. And so, I can only do what I can do. I can't control everything. And so the judgment of when this will be behind me is not left purely to me. But what I can do is just do my job, which is what I'm going to do, and live my life, which is what I'm going to do. And in terms of my own confidence, listen, there's no question that this shakes your confidence. And if it doesn't shake your confidence, then you're arrogant. I mean, some people that I trusted and relied upon let me down. And as a result, we let down the people of the state of New Jersey. Of course that shakes your confidence. But in the end, what it's resolved me to do is to get better. And I've said any number of times, for those of you who cover the town hall meetings on a regular basis, that I never promised that I'd have a perfect administration. There are going to be mistakes that are made by human beings, myself included. What matters is how you respond to those mistakes and how you act. And I hope that as we go forward, we can avoid this type of stuff, because this has not been pleasant for anybody, starting with the people who were caught in that traffic in Fort Lee from the 9th to the 13th of September. And everybody since then, it has been an unpleasant situation and continues to be. So I'll just continue to do the best I can. I'll continue to cooperate in the places where it's appropriate for me to do so. But most importantly, I'll continue to do my job. And hopefully over the course of time, some of that confidence lost will be restored and will be based upon the work that you do and the results that you produce. And that's what's most important. Yeah.
Can you say how much the report cost, or in essence of that, how much has been done to date for this work?
I don't know the answer to that question. Not something I deal with. That's what the Attorney General's office deals with. And so you should direct your questions to the Attorney General's office, because that's not something I know. Melissa, you have another question?
I just wanted to ask, you were talking about why you're going back to firm now, because you weren't a running firm, you didn't know somebody, but one of the people he chose to work on his team was Deborah Wanyang, who had you give her competition agreement, your reports of your vacation together. Do you think that at least gives the appearance that maybe there was some sort of special treatment given to you? Did you know this person, or did you somebody on that team?
Listen, the facts are the facts, Melissa. Read the report. I mean, they can't make up facts. And I've read the report. Every one of the factual assertions they make in the report is footnoted, endnoted, backed up by documentary evidence or testimonial evidence that they got from interviews. I mean, that just can't be manufactured. And so, in the end, like I said, I've got relationships, personal relationships, with most of the major law firms in this region who could handle this type of task. And so, in the end, I decided not to worry about that stuff for 2 reasons. One, because you'll be criticized no matter who you pick. And 2, because what I wanted was the best possible people I could find to get to the bottom of this and get me some answers. And as a result, this is what we've gotten in the report that was issued. And I think it's a report that is thorough and exhaustive and will stand the test of time. Michael Simons? Mike, I didn't hear the first part because the cameras are.
In December, when you announced that Deborah Comicioni would replace Bill Baroni at the Port Authority, you said it was a good time to put a new team in there. We asked if that extended to David Sampson, you said it did not. Was your intention to try to essentially get him not to leave?
No, my intention was to not turn the whole place over at one time. And what I wanted to do was have some measure of stability to get Deb acquainted, accustomed with the place, and then move. to try to come to an agreement with David at some point as to when he would move on. So it wasn't that I was going to try to convince him to stay for another 4 years. I knew for the last year that David wanted to go. He had made it very clear to me. And what I said to him was, give me a chance to do things in an orderly way. You're too important a presence there as the chairman to do all this at once. Let me get rid of the underlying staff first, and then we'll deal with what you need to do as we move forward. And obviously, events that intervened caused that plan to go a little bit differently.
You intend to choose a new chairman from outside or elevate somebody who's already on?
Well, I think in the short term, it has to be an elevation from someone inside. And then I'll work as I normally would to try to find a replacement, and we'll go from there. But, I just got the call about 2 hours ago. So initially, from what I understand from council, an initial elevation, since the resignation is effective immediately, will have to be done through Port Authority procedures from inside the group of current commissioners. And to get a new person on, I have to nominate them and go through the advice and consent process in the state Senate. So that will take some time, as it always does. And so in the interim, we'll have to have somebody who takes over. Don't ask me who. I haven't thought about it yet. There's obviously a limited number of folks, the remaining 5 members of the New Jersey members of the commission, and we'll see where we go from there, and I'll begin to have those conversations. Angie.
Why didn't the lieutenant governor hear you talk about the allegations made by Mayor Zimmer?
Because this is my press conference, not hers.
Part of the report.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a bit about the why? You've said here and at other places how important this is in your political life. So here is a woman who found this lied to you. You have an opportunity to talk to her. You've said that you haven't talked to her because as a prosecutor you want to see as convenient. But could you not have called in your chief counsel, sat her down in your office, and asked her what she was thinking?
Now I couldn't have, and put him in the same position that I didn't want to be in myself, to be accused later on of somehow trying to manipulate, coach, intimidate someone who had obviously been involved in wrongdoing? No. Listen, what you get with me is what you get. I cannot shed who I am. I am a former federal prosecutor. And when I thought about that choice, and I balanced the choice between whatever I might get from a conversation from someone who I know has already lied to my face, versus a look at this later on where people could say that we tried to do something to manipulate, coach, do whatever, I decided that the better course, the more prudent course, was not to pursue someone who had already not told me the truth when they had the opportunity to, but to let her go, fire her, and then move on. Because I think the risk of that, and I can only imagine the speculation that some of the more irresponsible members of your profession would be engaged in about what went on in that meeting between me and Bridget Kelly. I've been in this business for a long time, and I made that decision. That was my decision, and I have absolutely no second thoughts about it, because I have no great degree of confidence that, in fact, I would have gotten anything different from her then than I did in December when these questions were asked of her. Yes.
Governor, you said you've been doing a lot of soul searching over the last couple of weeks. We've heard many details have come to light about some of the things that David Wildstein had done at the Port Authority, and he had done these things supposedly in your name. It resonated through the halls that he was a close personal friend of the governor. I'm wondering, as you did that soul searching, what did you find out about yourself, and what are you changing?
Well, nothing that relates to the premise of your question. Because the premise of your question is so riddled with inaccuracies that, it's hard for me to respond to it. I mean, David Wildstein, as I've said a long time ago, never was and never has been a close personal friend of mine. David Wildstein is a close personal friend of Bill Baroni's. And it was Bill Baroni who brought David Wildstein into the Port Authority with my permission, but not at my suggestion. So, I know you continue to try to report this and go back to every high school friend that I had to try to get them to say, weren't they friends? And every one of them tells you that we weren't. Yet you continue to do a question where the premise of it is that he was my close personal friend, therefore it leads to soul searching. What led to soul searching was the fact that our administration disappointed the people of New Jersey through the conduct of some of its members. And that the entire premise of what I've tried to do as governor is to restore faith and trust in the government and in the motivations of the people who are doing the work on their behalf. And when you fall short of that, as we did, that causes soul searching. And what I've said in response to this question now a number of times is, there's no question that now I need to be much clearer to people about what my expectations are. That I need to be even more direct about what I'll permit and what I won't permit. And that to the extent that I didn't do that, and that it led any of these people to conclude that this was appropriate, that that's my failing too. And so that's the result of my soul searching over the last few weeks. Who hasn't asked a question yet?
What's your opinion of David Wildstein? I mean, it's been said his lawyer has kind of thrown out there that they might have evidence or evidence might exist that you have known about it during September around that report. I mean, what's your opinion of this guy who you say you don't really have any personal relationship with? He's friends with folks in your administration, friends with former colleagues, with I mean, what's your opinion of this?
Listen, I obviously believe that having David Wildstein at the Port Authority was a mistake. Let's just leave it at that. Phil? Yeah, I was pointing to you, Bob.
We know that at the town meetings, those of us who go regularly.
I said Phil, I meant Bob.
Okay, that's all right.
Sorry about that, Bob.
Let me go over this.
By me, actually.
One of the things is that we know at the town hall meetings that you're very proud of the fact that you reduced headcount by 6,000. Mr. Masso's report calls for at least 2 new hires, which is going to be an integrity compliance officer type person and an ombudsman senior statesman. This makes, I was just wondering, is the Attorney General like furniture now? Like, what is the role of the Attorney General? It seems kind of that we're relying on the federal government as a complicated corruption case.
No, that's not fair. That's not fair. I mean, and I think to characterize the Attorney General as a piece of furniture is really beneath what you guys should be doing. The Attorney General is doing an outstanding job, as did Attorney General Chiesa and Attorney General Dow. They're there to enforce the law. They're not there to act as an ethics advisor to the governor's office. And if you find that somewhere in the statutes or regulations, point it out to me.
So the Attorney General is not the lawyer for the state in terms of
No, no.
satisfying this production of documents from the U.S. Attorney?
No, he is not. Because he may also have to provide an investigative function at some later time. And so imagine that. Imagine what you all would be saying at that moment. That the same guy who's supposed to, may at some point have an investigation of his own, is helping us comply with the investigation of others.
Would you be opposed to an elected Attorney General as is a fashion?
That's a whole different story. I'm not getting into that now. Let's see who, yeah, you have one, Beth.
Do you plan to renominate Kevin O'Dowd to be the Attorney General? And what judgment, the report seemed to find that Bill stepping in, knew about lane closures, but didn't know the ulterior motives. So what judgment of his was it that you found that was a fireable offense? What was it?
Well, as far as Kevin O'Dowd, my support of Kevin has never wavered because I knew how Kevin conducted himself throughout this entire episode, and I think the report backs that up in terms of the efforts he took, particularly with Bridget Kelly, to try to get to the truth and to the bottom of this. So my support of Kevin is unwavering. I wasn't going to resubmit his nomination in the midst of all this while a report was pending, but Kevin and I will sit down and talk now that the report's been issued about the future and whether that's something he still wants to pursue. We've been occupied with other matters. So we'll sit and talk about that. But as far as I'm concerned, everything that I said about Kevin O'Dowd on the day that I nominated him to be Attorney General applies just as much today as it did then. And I've answered the question about Bill Stepien a number of times, so I don't think I need to go back over it. I mean, I chronicled on the 9th, and then just again, in response to Matt's question, my reasons for severing my relationship with Bill. And, you know, there's nothing new to add to that beyond what I said on the 9th and what I said in response to Matt's question. Heather. Yeah, my decision was that all you would do is ask me about this, and I didn't have the facts that I needed to be able to answer your questions. So I wasn't going to sit up here and you know, play dodgeball on your questions because I knew this is all you guys would want to ask me about. I mean, this is really not a heck of a lot more complicated than that. You know me. I've held regular press briefings throughout my administration. I'm certainly not afraid to answer questions from all of you, any of you. But the fact is, if I know what you're going to ask and I don't know the answer, then why would I submit myself to that? So it doesn't make any sense. So that's why I didn't do it, and it's amusing to me when you guys like write stories about what you think you're entitled to. Well, what I think you're entitled to is the answers when I get them. And if all you're going to do is ask me these questions and yell them at me every town hall that I walk out of and walk through of, I'm not stupid. Like, I get what this would be. So I was going to answer these questions as soon as I had answers to give them. Because remember, when I gave answers before, when I thought I had complete information and I didn't, it turned out to be a big mistake. One of the things I've learned is to try to not make that mistake again. And yet I will hold regular press availabilities. Of course, we'll quibble over what the word regular means, but we will hold regular press briefings. Yes, Matt.
There's a mention in the documents about David Sampson retaliating after the lanes are reopened. Have you asked?
Yeah, I asked him directly, and he said he has no idea what he was talking about.
Why, do you have any idea why and why else did you get the idea? Or I think
Matt,
the
any,
idea that he would retaliate?
Matt, anything, and this is for all of you, anything you ask me, which asks me to speculate on what David Wildstein was thinking or what Bridget Kelly was thinking, I'm not going to answer because I don't know. And I'm not going to get into the speculation game because it'll just put me in a spot where I'm throwing stuff out there up against the wall when I don't have a factual basis for it, so I'm not going to do that. All I can tell you, I absolutely asked Sampson. In or around that time. The thing I remember for sure asking him on the 8th was what he knew about the bridge lane situation. Did he have any involvement in it? Did he have any prior knowledge? Did he authorize it or approve of it in any way? And the answers to that were no. I don't remember, Matt, if I asked him about that particular piece on that day or maybe in the day or days after that. But I clearly asked him at some point early on, and he said he had no idea what he was talking about. Yes, the back.
Governor, the report, as you acknowledged, called for a by-state commission study of the Port Authority, not a court review. Your office conducted this sort of review of the entirety of Gibson Dunn. Why do you think that maybe an internal review is not appropriate?
Well, I'm certainly not saying that they can't do an internal review. If they want to, they can. If the commissioners decide they want to do an internal review, that's certainly within their purview. I think they've already sent it to the Inspector General, so I think the Inspector General would probably serve that purpose. But I'm not. This is not to be exclusive, okay? But what I think the report's recommending is that you need a group of people who have not been involved with the Port Authority. And one of the things I find infirm about what the Port Authority is up to right now is they're recommending bringing back a whole bunch of former executive directors and former guys who created the situation in the first place. Because let me tell you, this isn't the first time that the Port Authority has been involved in incidents that grow out of the inherent conflict between New York and New Jersey. And so I think bringing in the very people who helped to lay the foundation for this problem to examine the problem doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that's why this type of independent commission may make some sense. But in the end, let's be clear, this is going to have to be, if anything is going to be changed, is going to have to be something that I work on with Governor Cuomo. And, fact is I haven't had any conversations with him about this yet. So he and I will talk. We have a good relationship. And I think that the idea, of splitting the Port Authority into two may have some real merit to it. I've only, been thinking about this for the last 24 hours, so I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I think it certainly has merit to consider and something that, I'm sure will be a part of a lot of conversations that I'll have with our friends in New York over the course of the coming weeks. Yeah, Kelly?
Could you give us a little color about what your experience was being interviewed and what devices, personal devices, did you surrender, text her?
I gave them Kelly, I gave them anything they asked for.
And what was it?
My cell phone and my email accounts. And being interviewed, it's a number. I don't remember exactly. Anytime they asked, they called and they asked and said, we need X amount of time to review certain matters with you and ask you questions. I said, fine. And I cleared my calendar and did it. I don't remember exactly how many times. Huh? Kelly, I really don't remember. I mean, it started all the way back in January and has continued through till very near the time they issued the report. So I don't remember exactly how many times, and I don't think it really matters. The bottom line is that whenever they asked, I said yes. And however long they wanted, I tried to give them. And if they needed more time at another time, I gave them more time. Because in the end, my desire from this was for them to get all the information they needed to be able to put forward a comprehensive, exhaustive report, which is, I think, what they've done. And so it's incumbent upon me, if I'm asking everybody else to do that, to do it myself, and I did. Terry?
When you took office, early on, you put the Christie reform proposals. It was a four-part plan. One of them was ethics. That was what you gave one of your big things.
Yep.
You said, as a government, we need to have higher than just going by the numbers and doing scans.
Yep.
Now, the first time you had a high-powered aide who was accused of something wrong and potentially had something to bring back on the administration, you sort of just cut her loose, and your answer before was, I didn't really ask her why because I didn't want to know.
Seriously, I'm up here trying to very carefully answer your questions, and I don't know whether you can't take notes or you're not listening, but for you to characterize my last answer as, I didn't want to ask her because I didn't want to know, is so awful that it's beneath the job you hold. What I said was that I made a decision that given the chance, the likelihood I had of getting honest answers out of Bridget Kelly, given that she had lied to me weeks earlier, versus the appearance that it would create in a later inquiry that somehow I attempted to coerce, influence, in any way intimidate this person and her story, that I made the decision that the cost-benefit analysis of those two weighed on the side of me not having a private meeting with Bridget Kelly in the aftermath of these revelations. That is far, Terry, from saying I didn't want to know. And, those kind of questions are just ridiculous. Melissa.
This report gets a lot into the emotional state of Bridget Kelly and John Zimmer. It says that things go out of Kelly's personal life may have affected her. And neither Kelly nor John Zimmer were interviewed. It doesn't say anything really about the emotional state of Bill Worley or Bill Stepien or Gene Wildstein. Do you think that this report was fair to the women that it talks about? Because it kind of shows a different side of them that we don't see from the men they're talking about?
I assume that the only reason for that is that they didn't get testimony or have any documentary evidence which gave them a window into the emotional side of those folks. I don't think there was any other reason why that would have occurred. Yeah, Brian.
You made a very strong point, effective point actually, in protecting the Fifth Amendment rights of people who were present so far. And yet the report uses the terminology and talking about those same individuals that says they asserted the Fifth Amendment rights, quote, from which adverse inference
Can be drawn.
and appropriately be drawn.
Right. That's under the case law in a civil context, Brian. And I think they cited a case right after that. That's under the case law in a civil context. No adverse inference can be drawn in a criminal context. But in a civil context, which is what this examination was a civil examination, in a civil context, under the case law cited, an adverse inference can be drawn. But, for instance, in my old business, an adverse inference can't be drawn from someone having their constitutional rights asserted on the advice of counsel. So it's the distinction between a civil and a criminal inquiry. When it's a civil inquiry, an adverse inference can be drawn under the case law. In a criminal instance, it cannot. And in fact, the judge will charge the jury in a criminal instance to say, if the person's asserted the Fifth Amendment right, no adverse inference can be drawn from the defendant not testifying. That is not the same case in a civil context. Yeah.
There's been some criticism of the cost associated with the report, the $1 million. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I don't know where they got the $1 million from because, I don't know where they got that number. I saw it cited. I don't know where the number came from. But again, if we want to have a search for the truth, and we have an incident that people are concerned about, and you have investigations which are asking for the production of enormous amounts of documents and testimony, you need to get lawyers to help you shepherd that process to do it appropriately. And so that means they get paid for doing that task.
Will there be a confirmation from your office about the cost? Is it not that you're saying?
I assume it'll come from the Attorney General's office, who are the people who hire the lawyers in the first place and who review the bills and then authorize payment of the bills. And I assume that will happen. Certainly, let me assure you, we're not going to do anything to try to hide what the costs of this are, if that's what the thrust of your question is. But I don't know and have not been focused at the moment on what this ultimately is costing. I'm more focused on what result they would produce and whether it met my mandate, and it appears that it did. And so the cost then, when we pay the bills or when the bills are received, however that process works, I'm not familiar with it, but however that process works, when it happens, I'm confident that we'll make it public under the appropriate circumstances to do that. Yeah,
You're on your way to Vegas,
tomorrow.
right? Important meeting, certainly, your role as RGA chair.
Mhm.
Will you be having a private meeting with Allison, and will you be, you think you'll be prepared to discuss this report? Have you gotten questions that this report was important to have done by the time this meeting?
Oh, no. No, not at all. This report has nothing to do with it, and I've gone to, I don't know, 7 or 8 states in the last, 4 or 5 weeks, and it wasn't like I'm not going to have any meetings until I have the report. No. And I will tell you that there is significantly less interest around the country about this report than there is in this region, and I think appropriately so. So no, and I don't know whether I'm having a private meeting with Sheldon and Miriam or not. I haven't looked at my schedule yet for tomorrow. The only thing I know I'm doing for sure in Las Vegas is I'm speaking to the Republican Jewish Coalition, which I've done before. That's the reason for going to Las Vegas, I was invited to give a speech there, and I will be doing that as RGA chairman. Oftentimes, they set up other private meetings for me with donors or potential donors to solicit them for the Republican Governors Association. So I'm sure I'll have some meetings. I haven't looked yet as to what my schedule is. I usually wait till I get on the plane tomorrow, and then I look at what I'm going to be doing when I get there.
2 more questions?
John?
Yeah, Governor, the report makes pretty clear the actions of Bridget Kelly and David Lockstein in this whole episode. At the same time, how much responsibility do you take in putting them in these specific positions? And are you changing anything in terms of appointments processes or anything else in terms of vetting people for high-level positions like these?
Well, I take complete responsibility for Bridget Kelly being in the position she was in. It was my decision. And I take ultimate responsibility for David Wildstein being in the position he was in because I permitted Bill Baroni to hire him. And sure, John, it's kind of what I was talking about before about asking more questions and being more searching. You can bet I'm sensitized even more than I was before to this when you go through an experience like this. And I think that the people who advise me on this stuff are more sensitized to it as well. Yeah, Beth.
In the report, it talks about how Mr. Wildstein went and talked to Mike Jurniak about this plot that he had, and he mentioned Bridget Kelly. In the report, it
This-
also talks about the fact that
This plot that he had? A plot that he had? Yeah, all right, yeah.
Did your press secretary never come in and talk to you about what he allegedly learned from David Wildstein as they were preparing his resignation statement?
My understanding is that what David Wildstein told Michael Jurniak was that it was a legitimate traffic study and it was his idea, which would not have been news to me at the time. That had been relayed to me any number of times since October 1st. So I don't think David Wildstein said anything different than that. I think that he also said at that time that Bridget Kelly had some knowledge about it. That, again, triggered us to go back to Bridget Kelly and ask her, and she said she did not. So, and Mike did not bring that stuff directly to me. That's not the relationship. I mean, you guys need to understand this. That's not a revolving door where anybody can walk in anytime they want on any topic and just willy-nilly have at me. Okay? There's a process around here. People report to certain people. And if they want to get certain information to me, they've got to go through channels. The people who have unfettered access to me at that time were Kevin O'Dowd and Charlie McKenna. And everybody else in this office reported to either Kevin O'Dowd or Charlie McKenna. And so, I've seen some recounting of this in the press and this kind of, fiction about, well, why didn't this person come to you? Why didn't that person come to you? I mean, I'm the governor of New Jersey. I don't have everybody just walking in my door saying, hey, I got something I'd like to tell you. It's not the way it works. To be able to run an efficient and effective office, you have to have lanes of traffic, especially moving towards me. I thought you'd like that. On everybody, we have to have some sense of humor. And in this instance, those access points are guarded and governed by Kevin O'Dowd and by Charlie McKenna. At that time, now by Chris Perino. And what I'll tell you is that Mike always appropriately, I think, went either to his direct supervisor, Maria Camella, or to his indirect supervisor, Kevin O'Dowd, to report on all those things, not directly to me, nor would I expect him to, nor would it be appropriate for him to. His job is to report directly to the people he's supposed to report to, and I think the report indicates that that's exactly what Mike did. When Mike had information that he thought was important or relevant to the organization, he either shared that with Maria or he shared it directly with Kevin. And that's the way you're supposed to do it. And believe me, everybody, if I didn't do it that way, all I'd be doing is taking people into my office every day with what their newest idea was, their newest bit of information, or whatever. So Mike, I think, conducted himself completely appropriately by when he had information that he thought was relevant. In this instance, he went directly to Kevin O'Dowd, as I recall it in the report. There's other instances in the report where you see that he went to Maria Camella to provide information to her about press inquiries or other things that surrounded this issue. So in the end, from my perspective, that's the way an office runs efficiently and effectively. And I think if you look at most good governors' offices or any chief executive, whether it's in the private sector or in other areas of government, that's the way you have to do it, because if you don't do it that way, you'll just be overwhelmed by the people who want to come in and just have some face time. I don't have the time to do that all the time. That's why I set up a 2-chief system here as opposed to the 3 or 4 chief systems that we've had in this office in the past. I wanted very clear lines of authority that ran to me. And those clear lines of authority exist today. The chief of staff and the chief counsel. They divide up the job of running this office as they see fit with my approval. And then folks beneath them, like Mike, follow that course of conduct, because if they don't, then they'll have trouble, because this is the way we have to run things. So listen, everybody, I appreciate all the questions. It's such an extraordinary joy and relief for me finally to be able to come back and interact with you in the kind and gentle way that we always have. I'd love to say I missed you, but I didn't. But I'm looking forward to having you all back on a regular basis. And the fact of the matter is this. The single most important thing for me to do is to learn from this experience, to learn from what I've read and what I've heard, and to do my job. And all other considerations are really not even secondary, but tertiary. My job is to do the job of governor of New Jersey, and I've got another 3.5 years to do that, and I intend to do it as vigorously as I've done it in the years that I did it before any of this occurred. So I look forward to seeing you all again soon. I don't know exactly when that'll be, but I will see you all again soon and be prepared to answer your questions then. Thank you all very much.